Loud footsteps echoed down the cold, sterile hallways of the jail as Officer Sarah Daniels approached the solitary confinement cell. She had no idea what to expect on the other side of that thick steel door, but her heart beat loudly in her chest, a heavy weight in her stomach. Her eyes flicked over to the inmate she had been watching for weeks, locked away behind bars, a man named Jesse Mitchell. He was a mystery, a man with a quiet, calm demeanor, yet there was something in his eyes that had drawn her to him, something both haunting and magnetic. Their secret connection had blossomed slowly over time. Small moments of eye contact, brief conversations during her rounds, a few stolen smiles. They had been caught in a dangerous, forbidden dance, and neither could look away. But this time, something was different. As she opened the heavy door to the cell, her breath caught in her throat. Jesse was lying on the floor, unconscious, his arms spread wide as though he had collapsed in the middle of some desperate attempt to escape. The room was eerily silent. For a moment, Sarah didn't know what to think, panic rising inside her. She rushed to his side, kneeling down beside him. His face was pale, and his breathing was shallow. The tattoos that covered his arms and neck were a stark contrast against his now lifeless skin. Her fingers trembled as she reached for his wrist to check for a pulse. There it was, slow, weak, but still there. The sound of sirens in the distance grew louder, filling her ears. Sarah had always been the one to follow the rules, the one who never got too close, but now she was on the edge of something she couldn't understand. Something had gone horribly wrong. Her heart pounded in her chest. Jesse had been one of the quietest inmates in the jail, never causing trouble, always following the rules. But now, as she looked at him, unconscious, near death, a faint trace of blood at the corner of his mouth, she wondered if there was something she had missed. Something she hadn't seen, something dark lurking beneath the surface. Before Sarah could react, a hand grabbed her shoulder. She jumped, whirling around to see another guard standing behind her. Officer Turner. His face was tense, his eyes cold. "Daniels, what are you doing here?" he asked in a voice that was more of a command than a question. Sarah hesitated, glancing back down at Jesse. He's hurt. Someone's done this to him." Turner's gaze shifted to Jesse, his eyes narrowing. "It's not your problem. Get out of here, Daniels. Now." "But," Sarah started to protest, but Turner's grip on her shoulder tightened, the muscle in his hand pressing down, a warning in his touch. "You're in over your head," he said in a low, dangerous tone. "Don't get too involved with this one. Trust me." But Sarah wasn't going to walk away. Something inside her refused to leave Jesse to whatever danger had put him here. He had been different from the others, quiet, mysterious. And now, as her heart raced, she had a feeling something bigger was at play, something much darker than she had first thought. But the truth was hidden, locked away in the shadows. She needed to find out what had happened to Jesse before it was too late. As Turner turned to leave, Sarah hesitated, her mind whirling with questions. She knew this was more than just a simple incident. There was something sinister lurking beneath the surface, something that she couldn't ignore. She reached for the radio on her belt, fingers trembling. "I need backup. Something's happened to an inmate, and I think it's a setup." The radio crackled in her ear as she waited for a response. But just before she could hear anything, the lights in the hallway flickered. A loud crash echoed from somewhere deep within the prison. And then, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Someone was running. She stood up quickly, her heart pounding even harder now. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. Sarah couldn't shake the idea that something dangerous was coming. But who could she trust? Officer Turner had already warned her to stay away, but he wasn't acting normal. No one was. She turned back to Jesse, her hand hovering above his, uncertain whether to shake him awake or leave him where he was. The shadows seemed to stretch farther, as though the walls themselves were closing in. What had she gotten herself into? Before she could make up her mind, the door to the cell slammed shut behind her. The last thing she heard before everything went black was the sound of a voice, low, threatening, just out of sight. "Don't trust anyone, Sarah." And with that, she felt herself pulled into darkness. Sarah's eyes shot open, her breath coming in quick gasps as she struggled to focus. Her head was pounding, and the back of her neck felt stiff, like someone had wrapped it in a vice. She blinked rapidly, trying to adjust to the dim, flickering lights overhead. For a moment, she had no idea where she was. Then it hit her. The jail. Jessie. The voice. She was sitting on the cold, concrete floor of a small, dimly lit room. A storage closet, maybe. She tried to stand up, but her legs wobbled beneath her, and she nearly collapsed. Her hands scraped against the concrete as she caught herself. The sound of distant voices echoed through the walls. One of them sounded like Officer Turner. He was talking to someone, his words muffled. Sarah tried to listen, but everything felt off, like the air itself was thick with tension. Her fingers brushed her radio, now dangling loosely at her side. She reached for it and was relieved to feel that it was still there. She pressed the button, calling for backup. "This is Officer Daniels," she said, her voice shaky. "I need immediate assistance. I'm trapped." The response crackled through the radio, but it was garbled, full of static. Sarah, what happened?" The voice on the other end was indistinct, but it sounded like her colleague, Officer Thompson. "I don't know. Someone attacked me. I'm not sure where I am." Before she could finish, the radio cut out. Dead silence. Sarah's mind raced. She had to get out of here, find out what happened to Jessie, and figure out who was behind this. She could feel the weight of it, the mystery, the danger, pressing down on her chest. She pushed herself to her feet again, this time steadying herself with the wall. Her heart thudded as she pressed her ear to the door, listening for any signs of movement outside. She could still hear Turner's voice, but it wasn't clear enough to make out what he was saying. Just as she reached for the door handle, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway outside. Sarah froze, her pulse quickening. Her instinct told her to stay quiet, to wait, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being hunted. Her hand hovered near the door, unsure of what to do next. Should she wait for backup? Or should she take matters into her own hands and try to find out what was really going on? The footsteps grew louder, and before she could decide, the door to the storage closet swung open. Officer Turner stood there, his eyes hard and cold. "You shouldn't have gotten up," he said, his voice low and menacing. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Something was wrong, very wrong. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice trembling despite herself. "What happened to Jessie? Why was he hurt? What's going on, Turner?" Turner didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. His eyes never left hers. "You don't need to know," he finally said, his tone flat and emotionless. Sarah swallowed hard. She was starting to understand that this wasn't just about one inmate. It wasn't just a simple attack. There was something much darker happening beneath the surface. And Turner was involved. "Why?" she whispered, barely able to form the words. "Why are you doing this? What happened to the rules? To the law?" Turner's lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. "The law doesn't matter here, Sarah. Not anymore." Sarah took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what Turner meant by that, but she could feel the danger closing in around her. She had to get out. Just as she made up her mind to run, the lights in the room flickered again. This time, the darkness seemed to take on a life of its own, like the shadows were stretching out toward her, pulling her in. Turner's smile grew wider, almost predatory. "You can't run from this, Daniels. You're already in too deep. We all are." Before Sarah could react, Turner reached for something in his pocket, a small, black object that glinted in the dim light. Her eyes widened as she realized what it was. A gun. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice rising with panic. But Turner didn't move. He just kept smiling, like he had all the time in the world. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he said, his voice quiet. "I'm giving you one chance to walk away. Leave the jail, forget about Jessie, forget about everything, or I'll make sure you don't walk out of here alive." Sarah felt a cold sweat break out across her skin. Her mind raced, trying to think of a way out. The gun, Turner's calm demeanor, the flickering lights. It was all too much. She was trapped. Just as she opened her mouth to say something, the door to the room burst open with a loud bang. Sarah spun around to see another officer standing in the doorway, gun drawn. "Turner, drop it now." It was Officer Thompson. Turner's expression faltered, but only for a moment. He quickly stepped back, aiming the gun at Thompson. "Get out of here, Thompson. This doesn't concern you," Turner warned, his voice dangerously calm. Sarah's heart raced as she realized that the tension in the room was about to snap. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew one thing for sure. The game had just changed. What was Turner hiding? Why was he willing to kill to keep it a secret? And more importantly, what would happen next? The sound of gunmetal clicking in the air felt like a countdown, each second dragging on as if the world was holding its breath. Sarah's heart was pounding in her chest, the blood rushing in her ears. She wasn't sure if she should be more afraid of Turner, with his cold, calculating demeanor and the gun pointed at Officer Thompson, or of the confusion twisting in her mind. Thompson stood at the doorway, his gun aimed squarely at Turner. His hands were steady, but his voice was tight, the words coming out like he was trying to hold on to control. "Turner, this isn't you. Put the gun down. Let's talk about this." But Turner wasn't listening. His grip on the weapon tightened, and his eyes flickered to Sarah before narrowing in on Thompson. "You don't understand, Thompson. This is bigger than you, bigger than all of us. You can't just walk away from this. None of us can." Sarah took a slow, cautious step back, her pulse quickening. She knew that any move she made could set things off. One wrong word, one wrong move, and the situation could explode. Turner was a ticking time bomb, and she had no idea how to defuse it. Thompson's voice remained calm, though Sarah could see the tension in his jaw. "What's going on, Turner? You're talking about something bigger. You've got answers, don't you? You know something, and you're keeping it to yourself." Turner's smile was grim. "You don't get it. No one gets it." He glanced over at Sarah again, his gaze dark and unreadable. "The truth is, I've been trying to protect you. All of you. But the deeper you dig, the worse it's going to get. You're too far gone now." Sarah felt a chill creep up her spine. What was he talking about? Protect them? From what? "I'm done talking," Turner growled. "You had your chance." Suddenly, before anyone could react, he fired a shot into the air. The deafening bang echoed through the small room, making Sarah flinch. The gunfire shattered the fragile tension like glass, and everything seemed to move in slow motion. Officer Thompson instinctively dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the bullet as it lodged in the concrete wall, just inches from where he'd been standing. His body hit the ground with a thud, and he rolled to cover, his gun still aimed at Turner. "You're crazy," Thompson shouted, his voice full of disbelief and anger. "You've lost your mind." But Turner didn't flinch. He stood there, as if nothing had happened, the gun still in his hand, his expression hardening. "You don't get to say that to me," he snarled. "You're the one who never listened." In that moment, the room seemed to close in around them. Sarah was trapped, caught between two people who were once colleagues, now standing on opposite sides of something dark and twisted. She didn't know who to trust, didn't know who the real enemy was anymore. Her mind raced, desperate for a way out of this nightmare. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't be in the middle of this dangerous game any longer. But no matter which direction she tried to go, the walls kept closing in. Turner took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Sarah. "You think you know what's going on, Daniels? You think you can just solve this puzzle? You don't know what's at stake. You don't understand what we're dealing with." Sarah felt the weight of his words press down on her, but she refused to back down. "Then tell me, Turner. Tell me what you're hiding. What is this about? Why is Jesse in solitary, and why did someone try to kill him?" Turner's gaze darkened. His hand tightened on the gun, and for a moment, Sarah thought he might shoot again. But instead, he let out a long breath, his shoulders slumping. "I'm not going to say another word. I've already said too much." Before Sarah could respond, there was a loud crash from down the hallway, somewhere farther in the jail. The sound of footsteps followed, fast and heavy. "More of them," Turner muttered, his eyes flashing with panic. Suddenly, Sarah knew. She wasn't just in the middle of a disagreement between two officers. She was at the center of something much bigger. And whatever it was about to hit the fan. Without warning, Turner sprinted for the door, his gun still gripped tightly in his hand. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes wild. "I'm sorry, Daniels, but you're on your own now." Sarah watched, frozen, as he disappeared down the hallway. She didn't know if he was running to something or away from something, but it didn't matter. The danger had just escalated, and she had to act fast. Thompson, still on the ground, cursed loudly, clutching his side where he'd been grazed by the bullet. "Daniels, you okay?" She nodded quickly, her mind spinning. She didn't have time to check on him now. The footsteps growing louder meant one thing. Someone was coming. "We need to move," she said, urgency creeping into her voice. Thompson nodded, wincing as he stood up. "I'm not in the best shape to be running, but if we're going to get out of here, we better move now." The two of them ran, their shoes slapping against the concrete floor as they sped down the narrow hallway. The footsteps behind them grew louder. Whoever was coming, they weren't going to be friendly. But as they rounded a corner, Sarah's eyes widened in horror. At the end of the hallway, a figure was standing there, bathed in shadow, blocking the way. And then, she heard a voice that made her blood run cold. "Looking for something, Daniels?" It was Turner's voice. But now, something was different. He was not alone. The figure at the end of the hallway stepped forward, his silhouette growing clearer in the dim light. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the face, Turner. But there was something in his eyes now that sent a chill down her spine. Something wild, something desperate. He wasn't alone, though. Behind him, shadowed figures shifted, their faces hard to make out, but the threatening energy radiating from them was unmistakable. Sarah's pulse quickened as she tried to process the situation. Turner was leading them. He was bringing them into something much deeper, much darker, than she had ever imagined. "Turner," she called out, her voice trembling. "What's going on? Who are these people?" Turner didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step forward, his hand still clutching the gun. His expression was cold, colder than she'd ever seen it. This wasn't the Turner she knew. This man was someone else entirely. "Stay where you are," he ordered, his voice low, as if speaking to both Sarah and Thompson. "You don't want to get caught in the crossfire." Sarah glanced at Thompson, who was limping slightly, his face contorted in pain. They had to move. Fast. They couldn't let Turner, or whatever this was, trap them. "We need to go," she whispered to Thompson, but he was already stepping forward, his gun raised, eyes locked on Turner. "We need answers, Turner," Thompson shouted. "Now. What's going on? Who are these people?" Turner's lip curled into a thin, humorless smile. "You're in way over your head, Thompson. You don't understand anything, do you? All you've done is dig a hole, and now you're standing at the edge of it." The shadowed figures behind Turner began to move, stepping into the weak light. There were 3 of them, tall, broad-shouldered, their faces obscured by masks. The sight of them made Sarah's stomach twist in fear. Whoever they were clearly here for a reason, and that reason was something she and Thompson were not ready for. "You really think you can stop us?" One of the masked figures growled, his voice rough and gravelly. His hands rested on what looked like a large, metal pipe, a weapon ready to be used. Sarah felt the tension thickening in the air, almost suffocating. She could hear her own breath in her ears, her mind racing. They were trapped, and she had no idea what Turner was involved in. But she knew one thing. He wasn't acting like the man she'd worked beside all this time. He was part of something dark, something that made him willing to throw everything away. "We don't have to do this, Turner," Sarah said, her voice more forceful now. "We're still officers. We're still on the same side. Whatever this is, whatever you're mixed up in, it's not too late to stop." Turner's eyes flickered, and for a moment, just a moment, he looked uncertain. His hand wavered, and Sarah thought she saw a flicker of the man she once knew, the man who followed the rules. But then that moment passed, and he took another step forward. "I can't," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "You don't understand. There's no going back now. You'll get caught up in this, too." Before Sarah could respond, one of the masked figures lunged forward, aiming the metal pipe at Thompson. It was a blur of motion, and in an instant, Thompson was knocked to the ground, the pipe crashing against his side. He grunted in pain, but he managed to hold onto his gun, firing a shot into the air. "Get down," Sarah shouted, her own heart racing as the fight erupted around them. The masked man swung again, but Sarah was faster. She ducked, grabbing a nearby piece of debris and swinging it at him with all her might. The blow connected, sending the man stumbling backward. He growled in frustration, but Sarah didn't wait. She pulled Thompson to his feet, ignoring his groans of pain. "We need to get out of here," she yelled, her eyes darting around for any possible escape route. The hallway seemed endless, stretching on like a maze. There was no way out unless they could fight their way through. But Turner wasn't about to let them go that easily. His voice rang out, sharp and cold. "You think you can run, Daniels? You think you can walk away from all of this?" Sarah froze, her blood running cold. She had no idea how deep this went, how dangerous it all was. But Turner's words made it clear. This wasn't just a matter of law enforcement. There were things at play here, dangerous things, and he was caught up in them, unwilling to let go. Before she could respond, another figure emerged from the shadows. A man in a black suit, his face pale and expressionless, carrying a briefcase in one hand. He didn't speak, but the way he held himself, confident, calculating, made Sarah's stomach churn. The man stepped forward, past Turner and the others, his eyes locking onto Sarah. "I've been expecting you," he said, his voice smooth, almost too calm. "Officer Daniels, isn't it?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. How did he know her name? Who was this man? "What's this all about?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear building inside her. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened the briefcase, revealing a stack of papers inside. He flipped through them, his eyes scanning the pages as if he were reading something important. "I'm someone who has the answers you're looking for," he said, still not meeting her gaze. "But you're not ready for them yet. You've got a choice to make, Daniels. You can walk away, forget this ever happened, or you can stay and find out just how deep the rabbit hole goes." The words hung in the air like a dark promise, and Sarah knew then that her life, everything she'd known up until this point, was about to change forever. "Walk away," Turner urged, his voice quieter, almost pleading. "It's not worth it." But Sarah wasn't going to walk away. Not now. Not when she was so close to understanding what was really happening here. "I'm staying," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I need to know the truth." The man in the black suit finally looked up, meeting her gaze for the first time. His smile was thin, cruel. "Very well, then. Welcome to the game, Officer Daniels. You've just made your first move." And in that moment, Sarah realized she was no longer just a part of the system. She had become a player in something much bigger, much more dangerous. And there was no turning back. The man in the black suit stood before Sarah, his cold smile never faltering. He wasn't just any ordinary person. There was something about him that made Sarah feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, peering into an abyss of secrets and danger. She could feel it, the weight of the decision she had just made. She had chosen to dive deeper into the unknown, and there was no going back. "Follow me," the man said, his voice calm, almost too calm. He didn't look at her as if she were an officer of the law, as someone who could challenge him. No, he looked at her as if she were just another piece in a much larger puzzle. A puzzle she had unknowingly just stepped into. Sarah's instinct screamed at her to walk away, to turn around and run, but she couldn't. There were too many unanswered questions, too many things she needed to understand. And she couldn't leave Thompson behind, either. He was still struggling to regain his footing after the hit he took from the masked man. Blood trickled from the side of his mouth, and he was barely able to stand. "Thompson," she called, her voice frantic. Thompson looked up at her, his face pale but determined. "I'm good. Go. I'll catch up." She hesitated, torn between helping him and following the man in the suit. But the coldness in the man's eyes told her there was no time for hesitation. She needed answers, and she had to get to them before everything spiraled out of control. "Let's go," Sarah said to the man in the suit, trying to steady her nerves. He nodded, and without another word, turned on his heel and began walking down the hallway. Sarah followed, keeping her eyes on his every move, trying to anticipate what would happen next. Turner had said something earlier about a rabbit hole. It was becoming clear that this was no ordinary case. Something was happening here, something she didn't yet understand. They passed by several doors, all locked, the cold silence of the building pressing in on them. The flickering lights above cast strange shadows on the walls, as if the very building itself were alive, watching them. When they reached a small, nondescript door at the end of the hallway, the man in the suit stopped and turned to face her. He glanced over his shoulder, ensuring they weren't being followed. "Inside," he said. His tone was firm, no room for argument. Sarah stepped inside the room, glancing around quickly. It was nothing special, bare, with a single table in the middle. There were no windows, only fluorescent lights that buzzed above them. But the man didn't sit. Instead, he moved to the wall, pressing a hidden button that caused a section of the wall to slide open, revealing a hidden elevator. "After you," he said, gesturing to the elevator. Sarah hesitated. This wasn't just a part of the jail anymore. This was something completely different, something buried beneath everything she knew. She could feel the darkness pressing in, but she stepped inside anyway. She had come too far to turn back now. The man followed her inside, and the door slid shut behind them with a soft, mechanical hum. The elevator jerked to life, descending slowly, the lights inside flickering as it sank deeper beneath the ground. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. She needed to know what was happening. She couldn't just blindly follow him any longer. The man gave her a sideways glance, his face unreadable. "Where we're going, Officer Daniels, is where the truth lies. The truth about what's really going on at this jail. The truth about Jesse Mitchell, the truth about Turner, and the truth about your very involvement in all of this." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Jesse, Turner. Everything was starting to tie together in a way she wasn't ready for. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's eyes flicked to hers, his gaze sharp. "The people you've been working with, they're not what they seem. They're not even who they seem. Turner, for example. He's a part of something bigger, something much more dangerous. He's not here to protect the law. He's here to protect a secret." Sarah's stomach churned. This wasn't just about an inmate's injury or some simple act of violence in the jail. It was a conspiracy, and she was tangled up in it. "Why me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Why am I involved? I'm just a guard." The man smirked, though it wasn't a reassuring smile. "You're not just a guard, Daniels. You're a key player. They've been watching you. The things you've noticed, the questions you've asked, you've already seen too much. Now you're in this, whether you like it or not." The elevator jolted to a stop, and the doors slid open with a soft hiss. They were in a vast, underground facility. The walls were lined with steel doors, each with a single small window. The place was eerily quiet, but Sarah could feel the tension in the air. This was no ordinary underground level. The man led her down the hallway, his footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. He didn't say anything as they walked, but his presence was enough to make her feel like they were being hunted by something lurking just out of sight. They stopped in front of a large, reinforced door. The man placed his hand on a scanner next to it, and the door clicked open. Inside, the room was cold and sterile, with monitors lining the walls, showing footage from different parts of the jail. And in the center of the room, sitting calmly, was Jesse Mitchell. He was alive, but something was off. His eyes were vacant, distant, as if he weren't truly there. "Jesse," Sarah whispered, her heart pounding as she stepped forward. The man in the suit didn't move, but his voice was quiet, almost pitying. "Jesse's not the man you think he is. He's part of the reason you're here now. He's part of the reason you're all tangled up in this mess." Sarah felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat. Everything she thought she knew was wrong. Nothing was what it seemed. And now, Jesse was part of the mystery too. Sarah stood frozen, her eyes locked on Jesse, the man she had spent days trying to protect, trying to make sense of. He was sitting there, eerily still, as if he were no longer the person she'd known. His eyes were wide open, but they held no emotion, no recognition. He looked like a shell, as though his soul had been drained out of him. Her heart thudded in her chest. This was wrong. This was so wrong. "Jesse," she called softly, taking a hesitant step forward. Her voice trembled, the familiar sense of concern taking over. He didn't react. His gaze was distant, unfocused, staring at nothing in particular. The man in the suit watched her silently, his face unreadable. "You said he's part of this," Sarah murmured, her voice barely audible. "What's happened to him? Why is he like this?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned to the monitors around the room. Each screen displayed different angles of the jail, different cells, hallways, security cameras. But as Sarah's eyes scanned them, her gaze fell on something that made her blood run cold. A familiar face appeared on one of the screens, a face she recognized immediately. Officer Turner. But he wasn't alone. He was talking to someone else, someone Sarah couldn't make out clearly. The conversation seemed tense, and Turner was gesturing wildly, almost as if he were pleading with the person on the other end of the monitor. What is this?" Sarah breathed, her mind racing. The screens were showing everything, all the activity in the jail. But why was Turner on there? Why was he involved in this, whatever this was? The man in the suit stepped closer, his shoes clicking softly against the floor. "Turner is a part of this operation, just like Jesse. They're both involved in something much bigger than you could ever have imagined. And now, so are you." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. She could feel the pieces starting to click into place, but the bigger picture still eluded her. There was so much happening, and she was in the middle of it, but she couldn't see the whole story yet. Every answer led to more questions. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What's going on? What is this place? Why is Jesse? Why is he like this?" The man in the suit finally turned to face her. "Jesse's condition is the result of an experiment. A government project. A program that's been running under the radar for years." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "An experiment? What kind of experiment?" The man's lips curled into a thin smile. "A mind control experiment, Officer Daniels. The government has been trying to create soldiers, people who can be manipulated, controlled, without question, people who can be turned into weapons." Sarah's legs felt weak beneath her. This was insanity. She was in a room with the living proof of something she couldn't even fathom. Jesse had been used, had been changed. And it wasn't just him. There were others like him, others who had been twisted, who had been made into tools for something dark. Jesse was one of the first to be tested. The man continued, his voice calm, detached. He didn't survive the program. They pushed him too far. But they didn't stop there. Turner and others like him. They're a part of a larger operation. And you, Daniels, you've been brought in because you've unknowingly been part of their plan. Sarah felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "What do you mean?" You didn't know what was happening, yes," the man interrupted. "But you've been watching, asking the wrong questions. Turner and Jesse, they've been feeding information. Your every move has been watched. You're not just a guard. You're part of a much larger game. A game you've been playing without realizing it." Her head spun. "I don't understand. Why would they involve me? Why would they use me?" The man sighed, his eyes narrowing. "Because they needed someone they could control. Someone who would be close enough to the prisoners, to the situation, to gather information. And now they're using you to cover up their tracks, to protect them from exposure." Suddenly, the reality of the situation hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Turner, the man she had once trusted, had been part of something horrible, and she had been too blind to see it. A sick feeling curled in her stomach. "I don't believe you," she whispered, shaking her head. This is crazy. I can't be part of this. I can't be." "You already are," the man cut in sharply. "Whether you want to believe it or not, you're already in it. You've seen too much, Daniels. And now, it's only a matter of time before they come after you." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "Who's coming after me? Who's doing this?" "Someone who's been watching all of you for a long time," the man said ominously. Someone who's been pulling the strings behind the scenes. And they won't stop until the entire operation is secure. A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine as the gravity of his words sank in. There was no escaping this now. She had been pulled into a web so complicated, so far-reaching, that it felt like she was drowning in it. But there was no way out, not unless she exposed the truth. "Why are you telling me all this?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "What do you want from me?" The man's eyes softened for just a moment, as though he were reconsidering his decision to tell her anything. "Because you're the one who can stop it. You're the only one who can bring this to light. And I'm not going to be the one to do it. You have to choose, Daniels. Either you play their game, or you bring them down." Sarah's mind reeled. Could she really bring down this entire operation? Could she expose the people behind it? The thought of taking on something so vast, so dangerous, filled her with dread. But she couldn't ignore the truth now. She had seen too much, learned too much. And now, she had a choice to make. As she looked at Jesse, still sitting motionless in the chair, she knew she couldn't back down. Not now. Not when there was so much at stake. "Tell me what I need to do," Sarah said, her voice firm, her resolve hardening. The man nodded, his eyes cold again. "The first step is to get out of here. They'll be watching this place. And when they realize you've seen too much, they'll come after you next." The words echoed in her mind as the door to the room slammed shut behind them. And just like that, Sarah's fight for the truth had begun. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft, metallic hiss, and Sarah could feel the weight of what she had just committed to sinking in. She wasn't just a guard anymore. She wasn't just a bystander. She was in this, deep, too deep to turn back. The man in the suit stood beside her, his hands tucked behind his back as the elevator slowly ascended. His face was as unreadable as ever, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching her, assessing her every move. She could feel the heat of his gaze, even though he never looked directly at her. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with urgency. She couldn't help but feel a creeping dread rising in her chest. The uncertainty was suffocating. The man turned to her, his lips curling into a thin smile. "You're going to meet someone who can help you. Someone who knows what you're up against. But you have to be careful. They're already onto you." "Who?" Sarah pressed. "Who's they? And why do you trust me with this?" He didn't answer right away. The elevator's steady hum was the only sound between them for several moments. Finally, he said, "You don't need to know everything just yet, Daniels. Not everything can be explained in one conversation. But you'll learn soon enough." The elevator jerked to a stop, and the doors opened into a dimly lit room. The atmosphere was cold, sterile, just like the underground facility they had just left. Sarah stepped out, glancing around. The room was empty except for a single table and a man sitting at it. His face was hidden in the shadows, but Sarah could tell from his posture that he wasn't someone to be underestimated. The man in the suit gestured for Sarah to sit at the table. "This is where the game begins." Sarah hesitated, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. She wasn't ready for this. She didn't even know if she could trust the man in the suit, let alone anyone else in this twisted operation. But she didn't have much choice. She had already made up her mind. She had to see this through. As she sat down, the man in the suit pulled a chair across from her and slid it forward with deliberate calm. The man in the shadows finally spoke, his voice low and rough. "You're looking for answers," he said, "but answers don't come easily. Not when you're dealing with people who will kill to keep their secrets." Sarah's heart began to race. "Who are you?" she demanded. "What is this place? What do you know about Turner? About Jesse?" The man in the shadows chuckled darkly, the sound echoing in the small room. "You think Turner is the key to all of this? No, he's just a piece of the puzzle. The truth is much bigger than him, and you've stumbled right into it." "I've had enough of this," Sarah said, her voice rising, her frustration starting to boil over. "Enough of the games. I need to know who you are and what's going on. Now." The man in the suit's expression remained cold, but he watched Sarah intently. After a long moment, he finally nodded toward the man in the shadows, signaling him to speak. "The people you're up against," the man in the shadows' voice grew more serious. They're part of a covert operation that goes all the way to the top. They've been orchestrating this for years, pulling the strings from the shadows, manipulating people like you, people like Jesse. Turner's involvement isn't a coincidence. He's one of their agents. And now that you've seen too much, you're on their radar. Sarah felt a cold chill seep into her bones. The words felt like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. She had known something wasn't right, but hearing the confirmation that the conspiracy was much bigger than just one jail, just one officer, just one inmate, left her feeling sick. Are you saying Turner's been working with them all along? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man in the shadows nodded. He's not just a guard, Daniels. He's part of a secret faction, an underground organization with connections that run deeper than you can imagine. They're responsible for what happened to Jesse. They're responsible for what's happening now. And if you don't find a way to stop them, he trailed off, letting the threat hang in the air like a dark cloud. But how do I stop them? Sarah demanded. What can I even do? I'm just one person. The man in the shadows finally leaned forward, his face now fully illuminated in the dim light. His eyes were cold, calculating. You're more than just one person, Daniels. You've been a part of this operation longer than you realize. You've been getting too close to the truth, asking questions, digging into places you shouldn't be. They've noticed. And now, they're coming for you. A sudden loud thud echoed through the room, making Sarah jump. The walls seemed to tremble, and the room grew tense. Someone was coming. The man in the suit stood abruptly, his hand moving to the gun at his side. We need to move. Now. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She was so close to the answers she'd been searching for, but now she was more exposed than ever. The people who were orchestrating all of this had clearly been watching her every move, and now they were closing in. The man in the shadows was already standing, moving swiftly toward a door that Sarah hadn't even noticed until now. She stood, feeling the adrenaline surge through her veins. They had to move. She had to get out of there before it was too late. The man in the suit pulled her toward the door, his grip firm but not unkind. Stay close. Don't make a sound. Sarah followed without questioning him. The hallway beyond the door was dimly lit, and the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from around the corner. Someone was getting closer. Suddenly, a door on the other side of the hallway creaked open. A figure emerged, his face hidden beneath the shadows of a hood, but his posture was unmistakable. It was Turner. Run! The man in the suit shouted. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know who to trust anymore, but one thing was certain. Turner was no longer the person she thought he was. He wasn't just a fellow officer. He was one of them. Move! The man in the suit urged, grabbing Sarah's arm as they sprinted down the narrow hallway. The sound of footsteps behind them grew louder, closer. Turner was after them. And just like that, the chase began. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps as she ran, her feet pounding against the cold concrete floor. The man in the suit had a tight grip on her arm, pulling her through the narrow hallways with urgency, his footsteps echoing in the silence. She didn't have to look behind her to know that Turner was chasing them. The sound of his footsteps was unmistakable, relentless. Faster! The man in the suit urged, glancing over his shoulder. He's not far behind. Fear surged through Sarah, pushing her legs to move faster, even as her mind screamed in confusion. Turner. Turner was chasing them. The very man she had worked beside for years, the man she had trusted, was now an enemy. Everything she thought she knew had been turned upside down. Where are we going? Sarah gasped, trying to keep pace. Her lungs were burning, and her muscles ached with every step. But there was no time to stop. There was no time to think. The man in the suit didn't answer at first. They rounded a corner, and Sarah's foot nearly slipped on the slick floor. She barely caught herself before stumbling into the wall. The sound of Turner's footsteps grew louder. He was getting closer. There's a safe room up ahead, the man finally said. We can lock ourselves in there and regroup. Sarah nodded, not bothering to ask any more questions. She just had to get to safety. They had to make it to that room before Turner caught up. They rounded another corner, and the man in the suit reached a door at the end of the hallway. He didn't hesitate. His hand shot out to a keypad beside the door, and with a soft beep, the the door slid open. "Inside! Now!" he barked. Sarah didn't need to be told twice. She dashed through the doorway, and the man followed close behind, slamming the door shut just as Turner's shadow appeared in the hallway. The sound of heavy footsteps stopped just outside, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. "Are we safe?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The man in the suit didn't answer immediately. He stepped away from the door, his eyes scanning the room. It was a small, stark space, bare walls, a single desk in the center, and a few chairs scattered around. It wasn't much, but at least it felt like a temporary refuge. "We're safe for now," he said, but his tone was far from reassuring. "But not for long. Turner's not going to stop, and neither are the people he's working for." Sarah's heart was still pounding, and she could feel the adrenaline slowly fading, replaced by a deep, bone-chilling fear. She leaned against the wall, trying to steady herself. "How did this happen?" she whispered. "How did Turner get involved in all of this? What's going on? Why?" The man in the suit cut her off with a sharp gesture. "I know this is a lot to take in, but we don't have time to go over everything right now. We need to focus. Turner's been compromised, and that means he's working for them. They've been watching you, watching him. They know everything." "Everything?" Sarah echoed, her voice cracking. "Then they know—" "Yes," the man interrupted, his expression darkening. "They know you're involved now, and they won't stop until they take care of the problem you've become. You have to understand, Daniels, they won't hesitate. They'll do whatever it takes to silence you." Sarah swallowed hard, trying to push past the fear rising in her throat. "So what do I do now? How do I stop them?" The man in the suit's eyes flickered briefly to the door before he turned back to her. "We need to take down their operation. Everything. All of it. We need to expose them before they have a chance to bury us all." "But how?" Sarah asked, feeling the weight of the impossible task press down on her. "How do we even start?" The man stepped closer, his face hard. "We have to get to their main headquarters. It's the only place where all the information is stored. They've been using it to manipulate everyone. Turner, Jesse, everyone. That's where you'll find the answers. That's where we can end this." The urgency in his voice made Sarah's heart race again. She wasn't just fighting for her life anymore. She was fighting for something bigger, for everyone who had been manipulated, for everyone who had suffered because of the people who were pulling the strings behind the scenes. "But we can't just walk in there," Sarah said, shaking her head. "There's no way. We need a plan." The man's lips pressed together, his eyes narrowing in thought. "You're right. We need to be smart about this. But we don't have much time. They're already onto us. We'll have to move quickly." As if on cue, a loud thud came from the other side of the door, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy boots moving through the hallway. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "They're here," the man said, his voice low. "We don't have time to waste. We need to move now." He reached for a drawer on the desk, pulling out a small device that looked like a communicator. He pressed a few buttons, then held it out to Sarah. "This will let us keep in contact. You'll need it when we split up." Sarah stared at the device in his hand, the weight of everything crashing down on her. She had no choice but to keep going, no choice but to play their game and fight back. "Are you ready?" the man asked, his eyes locking with hers. Sarah nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'm ready." Before she could say another word, the door burst open with a deafening crash. And there, standing in the doorway, was Turner. "Don't move," he said, his voice flat, void of the warmth it had once held. His eyes were cold, calculating. "It's over, Daniels. You should have stayed out of this." But Sarah didn't move. She didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. This was her moment, the moment where everything changed. Turner's eyes flickered across the room, scanning every corner, every detail, as if he were looking for any excuse to strike. He had changed so much from the man Sarah had known. The warmth, the camaraderie, the trust. All of it was gone. Now, he was nothing more than an agent of whatever dark force was pulling the strings behind the scenes. For a moment, there was silence. Sarah could feel her heartbeat pounding in her chest, her breath shallow. She was trapped. She couldn't run. Not with Turner standing there, blocking the only exit. "Turner," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. You're not yourself." Turner didn't respond. He simply took a step closer, his face cold, emotionless. "I'm exactly who I've always been," he said, his tone flat. "And you've been a problem for far too long." Sarah's stomach twisted, the fear sinking in deeper. "No," she said, shaking her head, trying to stay calm. "You've been manipulated. You don't have to do this. You can still walk away from this." For a brief moment, there was a flicker in his eyes. Something, maybe, just the smallest hint of doubt. But it was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared. Turner's expression hardened again, and he raised a hand, signaling the men who had followed him into the room. From the shadows, two other figures stepped forward, both armed. They had been waiting in the hallway, ready for the moment to come. "Turner, stop," Sarah pleaded, her voice stronger now, desperate. "Please, I know you. This isn't you." But Turner didn't seem to hear her. Or maybe he just didn't care. "You're too far gone, Daniels. You should have stayed in your lane. Now you're going to pay the price for what you've uncovered." A sinking feeling washed over Sarah, and her mind raced. There had to be something she could do. She couldn't let them take her. She couldn't let them silence her like they had done to so many others. The man in the suit, her ally, for better or worse, was already reaching for something in his jacket. A weapon. But Turner was faster. The sound of gunfire rang out, echoing through the room. Sarah's heart leapt into her throat. The man in the suit staggered back, a red stain spreading across his chest. He collapsed to the ground with a soft thud, his eyes wide with shock. "No!" Sarah screamed, rushing to him. She knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she tried to stop the bleeding. But it was no use. The bullet had done its damage. The man in the suit's eyes flickered one last time before they lost all focus. Don't let them win," he rasped, his voice faint, but still urgent. "You have to expose them. It's the only way." His hand fell limp, and Sarah could only watch in horror as the life drained from him. She hadn't even had the chance to ask him everything she needed to know. The answers, the truth. She couldn't afford to lose them now. The cold voice of Turner brought her back to the present. "It's over. You're done, Daniels." Her chest tightened. The weight of the situation was crushing. She had to act. She had to move now. With a surge of adrenaline, Sarah shoved the dead man's body out of the way and scrambled to her feet. The two armed men were still standing near the door, their eyes trained on her. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. But then, her eyes caught something in the corner of the room. A small vent, high up on the wall. It wasn't much of an escape route, but it was her only chance. She didn't hesitate. She darted across the room, her mind racing with plans and possibilities. The two armed men lunged at her, but she was already climbing. With a swift motion, she grabbed the edge of the vent and pulled herself up, using the last bit of strength she had. Gunfire erupted behind her, but it missed. She was already up, her body twisting into the narrow opening. She didn't dare look back. The darkness of the ventilation system swallowed her whole. The sound of her breath echoed in her ears as she crawled through the tight space, her hands scraping against the metal walls. Her mind was still racing, still reeling from what had just happened. The man in the suit was dead. Turner was hunting her, and there was no telling how many more would be involved in whatever twisted operation they were trying to cover up. She couldn't stop. She couldn't think about what she had just witnessed. Not yet. Not until she was safe. But the air in the vents grew thicker as she crawled deeper, and Sarah could feel the claustrophobia creeping in. She had no idea where she was going. All she knew was that she had to get out of here. She had to find the answers before it was too late. A sudden sound behind her made her freeze. She didn't know if it was just her imagination or if someone was already chasing her through the vents. But it didn't matter. She had to keep going. She couldn't let them catch her. Not now. She had come too far. She had seen too much. And she wasn't going to let them stop her. Sarah's breath echoed through the narrow vent, each inhale shallow and tight as she crawled, determined to put distance between herself and the chaos she'd just escaped. Her body ached from the strain, her knees and elbows scraping painfully against the cold, metallic surface of the ventilation system. But there was no time to slow down, no time to rest. Her mind was racing, every thought jumbled. The man in the suit was dead. Turner was after her. The people who had orchestrated everything were closer than ever, and Sarah had no way of knowing how many others were involved in this web of corruption and deceit. All she had were fragmented pieces of a much larger puzzle, and the walls of the vent seemed to close in around her as if trying to suffocate her thoughts. Still, she pressed on. She didn't have a choice. The sound of distant footsteps above her made her freeze. She stopped, listening intently. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she cursed the tight space she was in. The last thing she wanted was for Turner or anyone else to find her, especially now that she was in such a vulnerable position. She crawled forward slowly, quietly, making as little noise as possible. She couldn't help but wonder how long she could keep this up. How long could she run from her past, from everything that was chasing her? Eventually, she reached a small grate at the end of the tunnel. It was covered with dust, but it looked like it might lead out of the building. Her hands shook as she pried it open. The moment the vent cover came loose, a cool gust of air rushed in, making her breath feel a little easier, if only for a moment. She pushed herself through, her body sliding out of the vent and into a dimly lit, narrow hallway. She was out, for now, but the danger hadn't passed. She knew that. Every step she took in the unfamiliar hallway felt like it could be her last. Turner and his men were close. They would be looking for her. And no matter where she went, she couldn't outrun the truth. She had to finish what she started. She had to bring this all to light. Sarah took a deep breath, steadied herself, and moved forward, determined. She had to find answers. She had to uncover what they were hiding, what Turner had been working for, and why Jesse had been involved in all of this. If she could get to the heart of it, she might be able to stop the entire operation, expose the people behind it, and maybe, just maybe, bring justice to those who had suffered. The hallway twisted and turned, but Sarah kept going, trying to get a sense of where she was. It was hard to focus. Her mind was clouded with questions, and the sound of her own footsteps seemed unnervingly loud in the quiet of the corridor. She spotted a door at the end of the hallway. A small sign on it read, "Restricted access, authorized personnel only." It looked like a storage room or perhaps an office, but to Sarah, it was a sign of something important. It was her only lead. She approached the door cautiously, listening for any sounds behind it. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. Her hand reached for the handle, but before she could turn it, a voice came from behind her. Looking for something? Sarah froze. It was Turner. Her pulse quickened as she turned to face him. He was standing at the end of the hallway, blocking her escape. The gun in his hand was pointed toward her, his expression colder than ever. But there was something else in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. A mix of frustration, maybe regret, but most of all, determination. "You shouldn't have come here, Daniels," Turner said, his voice low and menacing. "You should have left it alone. You should have walked away." "You don't understand," Sarah said, her voice tight. "I'm not just going to walk away. People are being hurt. People are dying. And you're part of it." Turner's eyes hardened, and he took a step forward. "I didn't have a choice. Neither do you. They're coming for both of us, and you can't stop it." Sarah's heart sank, but she wasn't going to let him intimidate her. She couldn't. "Not now. I can stop it," she said, her voice stronger. "I have the evidence. I know what you've been hiding, what they've been hiding, and I'm going to expose it, whether you like it or not." Turner's lips twitched. It was the faintest of smiles, but it wasn't one of relief. It was a smile of bitterness. "You think you're the first to try?" Turner said, shaking his head. "You're playing a dangerous game, Daniels. There's more at stake here than you realize. And in the end, they always win." Sarah took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what he meant, but she knew that his words were a warning and a threat. She had no idea who they were, or how far this conspiracy went, but she couldn't afford to get distracted by fear. Not now. She had come too far. "I'm not giving up," she said firmly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Not until the truth comes out." For a moment, Turner just stood there, as if weighing her words. Then, with a sharp movement, he raised his gun, pointing it directly at her. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the endgame. But then, something unexpected happened. Turner faltered. His hand trembled slightly, and the gun wavered in his grip. "Turner," Sarah said cautiously, her voice softer now. "What's happening to you?" His expression twisted, a flash of something human. Regret, maybe, flickering in his eyes. But it was gone in an instant. "This isn't about me anymore," Turner said, his voice low. "This is bigger than you and me. And you're out of your depth." Before Sarah could react, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. She didn't have time to think. She had to act. She lunged for the door behind her, yanking it open and slamming it shut just as a barrage of bullets slammed into the walls around her. She was inside, and she was alive. For now,